So welcome everyone to our Fashion Means Business Fashion Talk. We're joined today by Ursula de Castro, who's very kindly given up her time to talk to us about fashion revolution and the truth behind the fashion industry. So Ursula, thank you very much for joining us today. We really appreciate you giving up your time. I know how busy you are at the moment. You can perhaps expand on that a little bit later, but just really sort of by way of introduction, it'd just be really lovely if you could just introduce yourself, a little bit about yourself and you know, how have you got to where you've got to now?
Yeah, waddling through rubbish, that would be the answer. So yes, I did start in the late 90s with a small upcycling brand called From Somewhere, which was one of the exhibitors, one of the successful exhibitors at London Fashion Week, and which was, it started by me only reusing things that I found. To begin with, it was secondhand, then it became warehouses of secondhand clothing, and then it progressed to us using pre-consumer waste, particularly from the luxury industry. But in between 1997 and its demise in 2014, we worked with all the top boutiques in the world. We were on all the cool 90s celebrities and, you know, designed the upcycle collection for Topshop, or Topshop Reclaim to Wear, for Robert Di Capa, which was sportswear, for Jigsaw, for Test, you name it, we tried it. That led to me co-founding and co-curating Estetica, which was the British Fashion Council Sustainable Fashion Area at London Fashion Week that I did curate with my partner, still husband, Filippo Ricci, with whom I still work on Fashion Open Studio, and the brilliant Anna Orsini from the BFC. Estetica also ran from 2006 until 2014, and it was really the playground of so many movements that were born in the UK at that point in time. You know, we're thinking Centre for Sustainable Fashion, but also Professor Becca Early with her TEDS 10, Ethical Fashion Forum, and probably more. So, you know, I mentioned 2014. In 2013, the Rana Plaza building collapse in Bangladesh, killing 1,138 people and injuring over 2,500. And that was the start of Fashion Revolution, which it took over my life from 2013 onwards and became really the focus of my campaigning and my work.
Okay, so actually the Rana Plaza disaster actually led you to set up Fashion Revolution. Perhaps you could give us a little bit of an insight into actually what is Fashion Revolution.
Absolutely. So it is by now the biggest activism movement in the world, fashion activism movement in the world. We have a presence in 92 countries. And I guess that's really what makes us very different, because we acknowledge that this industry is different regionally, and every country will have a different interpretation and different needs when it comes to their fashion. And so Fashion Revolution has this incredible opportunity to be the voices of our country coordinators in 92 countries. So an incredible opportunity to really hear it from the ground up. We started by asking what sounds like the simplest questions in the world, but it's one of the hardest to reply if you're in the fashion industry, and that was, who made my clothes? The reality is that we knew very well the brands would have found it impossible to reply to this, because we knew how difficult it had been for the majority of brands that were producing in Rana Plaza to actually put their hands up and say, I was there. They didn't know. You know, we know of behind the scenes frantic calls between CEOs and CFOs of big companies saying, where were we producing there? Was the Rana Plaza factory complex one of our suppliers? And only a few who had a modicum of transparency at the time could actually say, yeah, we were working there. Took 1 year for Benetton to admit and pay. So, you know, this lack of transparency was killing people, because immediately after the crisis, nobody could be held accountable for the money that was needed to get these people into hospital, to help them, to, you know, protect their families. That's transparency. It might not lead you to best practice. It might lead you somewhere like Rana Plaza. But the organizations on the ground are facilitated by this data and by this information. So for us, it became the first important thing. Then we, as a consequence of that, we launched our Fashion Transparency Index, where now we look at over 250 brands for what they publicly disclose around their supply chain. Again, you know, unfortunately, transparency is not mandatory. It's self-regulated, which in itself is not brilliant. But it is a step, it is a giant step, especially considering at which point we were in the industry before starting to analyze this data and actually committing to publishing this data.
So Fashion Revolution sort of stands for kind of 3 kind of key changes, of which cultural change, industry change and policy change. Could you perhaps expand a little bit on what those pillars actually mean?
Yeah, I mean, you know, the reality is that this is not an industry where one sector of society can take over and resolve the problem. This is an industry that affects 100% of the population. It is an industry that affects so many other industries in its supply chain, literally from agriculture to communication. And it is an industry that has a profound effect on both people and nature. Now, this profound effect can be a negative profound effect that comes from the exploitation of being a supply chain worker, for instance. But the profound effect is in our culture. The profound effect is in our heritage. The profound effect, therefore, is also in our future. It embodies so much of what we are. And not understanding this history, not understanding in particular the history of fashion industrialization and how its business has an incredible effect on the soil and the soul of people, is not considering it as a whole. So, you know, we look at different pillars because we know that there are different solutions. Fashion is also profoundly individualistic. So it really is not one size fits all. And, you know, the business models that we've been somehow celebrating and, okay, let's put it this way, accepting are business models that are very, very wrong within our modern culture. So effectively, we're talking about fashion as innately about innovation, you know, the latest trend, the coolest thing. But ultimately, the system that governs this industry is as old and as male as the oldest male. So unfashionable, so uncool, so utterly, potentially also dangerous. We need to somehow unite the cool factor, the persuasivity of fashion, the fact that fashion may make you change the way that you think simply because you identify with a tear on a punk jacket. We need to align it with the business of the future, and the business of the future is really different to the business of the past because we as humans evolve. And right now, our very evolution is at stake. Right now, we have us, people, citizens, customers of brands. Right now, we have an opportunity to really rise up and say, no, 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 not in my name, change. But brands have an obligation to do so because brands work for us. So if we as customers, as citizens, actually join hands and decide which are the resounding questions that we need answered and what are the resounding solutions in order for us to be satisfied with those answers, to believe them to be verifiable and comparable, then we've got a pretty hefty chance of making this industry a leader. If we leave it be, then we haven't had a pretty hefty chance of surviving whatsoever, because it's an incredibly powerful industry that needs to be curbed and slowed down and bettered.
It's really interesting what you say there, because at the Fashion Business School, you know, we teach that the customer is central to a business, that, you know, if you don't know who your customer is, and if you don't deliver on what your customer needs and wants, then your business is not a successful model. So
I would say that 99% of these models are successful. And I would also like to want to talk about language, because right now, 95% of what we're being sold is unsustainable. So how come we're still calling it fashion and sustainable fashion? Why do I wear sustainable fashion? I don't. I wear fashion. I just refuse to buy unsustainable fashion. Or if I do buy unsustainable fashion, I sustainably buy it by keeping and mending it and so on and so forth. But, you know, the truth is that, you know, we can be kind with brands and say, yeah, you know, it's very difficult for them, poor things, because, you know, every time they try to greenwash, every time they try to do something right, then people will strangely notice all the things that they've done wrong for the past 30 years. How weird. I wonder why that is. But the reality is that we have been consistently lied to for a long time. So one, this industry designed itself to be opaque. The fashion industry did not move to producing countries to do good, to give these people jobs. The fashion industries moved to the producing countries, let's say starting with China, India, Bangladesh. It moved there because it knew that it was deregulated, while in Europe we were regulating against how much we could pollute, how much we had to pay our workers. So the industry moved there to cover its tracks, to make more money. And we were not ever explicitly told at the time quite how exploitative they were going to be, both when it comes to nature and people. But I'm going to bring it to here and to now and to you and you shopping. And so we are in the middle of a climate emergency, the biggest crisis probably that we have faced since the last, 100-year wars that were killing everyone. And yet we are lied to, because at this point in time, we are not given an opportunity to actually interact sustainably with the things that we buy, by the brands we buy them from. So if you think about sustainability right now, you'd think that it is entirely on how much you're willing to spend. Oh, but you need to buy something a little bit more expensive because that will last much longer. Crap. Oh, but truth is that you have to buy less and buy better. Well, yeah, to a point. But the truth is that the onus on making fashion sustainable is the brands. We need mandatory transparency and regulation, because we as customers have a right to know how to interact with these clothing so that we don't poison ourselves and our communities. This is what it's done for food and for beauty and for pharmaceutical. It's the same. What do you do when, if you're not vegan, you buy a piece of chicken? Check the sell-by date. Check if it's been pumped with antibiotics. Check if it contains E numbers, or can you do that verifiedly and honestly with your clothes? No, you can't. And yes, guess what? Our clothes contain toxic substances that are very often banned where we live, but not in the country of origin. what is the country of origin? Can you trust the country of origin? No, you can't, because very often something is hand finished in Italy, but like literally one button, and everything else is actually made somewhere else. And before that, another somewhere else. And before that, another somewhere else altogether. So we are not given the opportunity to make the right decisions when we buy. But above all, we are negated the opportunity to do right by that product and treat it as it should be treated. Again, for our benefit, our health, and that of the planet and our immediate community. So, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, this is not just bad practice. This is deliberately treating your customers in a way that is putting them in danger. And the fashion industry is putting us all in danger. The fashion industry is putting us in danger from cultural exploitation, social exploitation, environmental exploitation, and it's hiding it all behind a pretty shirt. So.
Okay, so Rana Plaza, 2013, the birth of fashion revolution, shocked the world. However, what sort of changes has that brought, in your view, across the fashion industry?
Certainly a massive argumentation of awareness. So we all really know what transparency is, what it's supposed to mean. When a language itself becomes mainstream, it's useful because it means that people will be able to gather information more easily, to compare more easily, and to form their own opinions, which is really, really, really what we need more than anything right now. I mean, this is not a difficult subject, but it is complex. And complexity means that you have to learn and look at different things. So for sure, since Rana Plaza, this has changed hugely. The brands are really beginning to understand that they're not going to have much business at all unless they, innovation and sustainability. The young designers are aware of the fact that, again, they won't be employed unless they have a pretty good, pretty hefty bag of this knowledge. But, unfortunately, it sort of felt at the time like a lot was changing, and then it plateaued. And then guess what? It's now during COVID that we are seeing yet again the fact that during a tragedy, the magnifying lens shows us everything that we do wrong. And so again, when it comes to the business of fashion, it was so evident in Rana Plaza how wrong and dysfunctional it was. And COVID has made it even worse, because for the first time, it's actually affected us on our doorstep. And I'm referring to Leicester, for instance, where not only garment workers are, outrageously underpaid, but they were also made to work in such conditions that they ended up spreading COVID throughout their community. That's what was discovered at the time. So, fast fashion or supply chain, these aren't distant, far away land. You can presume quite, surely that the supply chain is extremely connected with your wardrobe. And anyway, whenever you buy something, you become a part of the supply chain anyway. So, we're all in this together, really.
So as horrifying as it is for us to have learned some of these practices, which have been magnified by COVID, do you think the industry is going to learn from this? Do you think COVID is going to change the way we are, or the way fashion businesses work?
Not immediately, I don't think so, no. But inevitably, yes, in the sense that it's too obvious. The profound inequalities that we face, the profound inequalities that stop us from being equally invested in the environment that we all share and in each other's health and well-being, have been crossed. I mean, I think it's very clear that there's been a very unequal way of suffering, that there has been an even more unequal distribution of dignity and indignity. I mean, you know, we see the tragedy of someone, you know, the CEOs raking millions and millions and trillions even, while owing their own garment workers billions in unpaid wages. I mean, it's just so profound, shocking when you see it, you know, of a Monday morning in your local newspaper, that this is what's going on. There have been amazing conversations and there have been amazing campaigns. And I would cite, I guess, three. The Remake Our World campaign with the Pay Up hashtag, and now with the Share Your Profits hashtag. The work of the Slow Factory, which has been providing free lessons for anyone that really wants to analyze and understand more around colonialism, particularly from a fashion perspective. The public speaker and influencer Aja Barber has also really been talking a lot about, you know, affordable fashion, but how can we call it affordable if it's not affordable to the planet and to the people who make it? And you know, we really will need to change, and we really will need to slow down. So in my book, which I published very recently, and it's all about mending, but it's not a how to mend, it's a why to mend, because I'm not a very good mender myself, but I know a lot of brilliant ones. But the thing I'm talking a lot right now is around how dangerous it is, the recent narrative that fast fashion is so badly made that it doesn't warrant being repaired. And you know, this is really not what you tell a child growing up whose culture is already telling them don't wear the same outfit twice. So I am very much one woman crusade around this, but it's very interesting because even in just a couple of months I'm beginning to see results. But I'm basically saying all fast fashion stores provide repairs, because the truth is that repairing is niche and it's expensive, and we now need societal change in order to make sustainability available for everyone and not just those who can afford it. And so, you know, these are the businesses that we need to look at in the future, things that are potentially the opposite of what we're imagining right now, like literally, whoops, let's turn it around. But the reality is that the way that we've been brought up, my generation, your generation, hasn't changed so much. And it's still that something like, you know, about 40, 45, something like that, brands control over 90% of the market. And again, never really trust me with numbers nor statistics. Not with numbers because I'm bad at counting, but statistics, because, you know, statistics oscillate. That's the whole point of statistics, is that they're not, you know, fixed. When new research comes up, then the statistic is likely to change. So I am always a little bit approximate, but it is true, you know. Have you ever been on a high street in Milan or in London or Mumbai? Spot the difference. And this is what we're seeing. We're seeing an oligopoly of brands that are ginormous, that can hardly apply any changes because of how ginormous they are. They will say, because we're so ginormous, once we will be applying changes, then everything will be resolved. But I would beg to differ. I would say anything that ginormous cannot possibly operate sustainably, because what is sustainable at the end of the day is not growth, it's replication, it's not excess, it's prosperity, it's not, you know, the top, it's abundance. These are words that we don't use when we describe our capitalistic system. It's just more. That's the only word that we understand when it comes to business, more. And yet it's the opposite is true. I mean, more is, millions and millions and millions of brand. And I mean, when I say millions and millions, people automatically think I'm talking about H&M or Primark. But I mean, Armani Jeans, do you want to know how many millions of clothes Armani Jeans does? The luxury, what about the premium, the Michael Kors of this world? I mean, where that they ain't slow. And so the concept of really looking at the alternative and for the big mainstream just to shove to the side for a while and let the real alternative shine. And this is why I'm so keen to talk to students that are doing business or that will be thinking about fashion business. Because, I mean, big is not in. It doesn't work. It invades small, regional, mindful of each other's cultures. That's what we want to see. So the West has patronized the world with our own systems. Historically, blah, blah, blah. Fashion industry follows precisely the same routes as imperialism, colonialism, exploitation, cotton, picked by enslaved people in the American South, processed in Victorian sweatshops, sold and distributed via the East India Company. We need to create different models.
Yeah, it's refreshing to hear what you're saying. My background is working in the industry as a buyer. And every 6 months we would do our buy plan, and it was like, well, we need to grow sales 5%, and growing sales 5% meant making 5% more stock. But actually there's many other ways that we can grow the profitability of a business without having to produce more. Because often,
well, I mean, the point is,
right.
I've been in the factories. I did a collection for a couple of years. It was ourselves and another upcycling brand called Good One. And we did a collection with Tesco, believe it or not, using all of their obsolescences in Sri Lanka. This was in 2010, the first kind of reproducible online collection made entirely with obsolescences. It's a big thing in 2010. And I went around with Tesco, and they were literally changing factory to get something cheaper by 2 pence, or changing countries to get something cheaper by 3. And the reality is that what amazed me the most, and this is something I have seen in every factory that I have visited, and I visited several, I've been very lucky always to be shown the higher end. I've probably been in one sweatshop in my life. But what is relentless and the same everywhere is that in most of these organizations, supply chain workers are paid by the piece and not by the hour. Need I say more? If you're paid by the piece, how concentrated are you going to be when you make that piece? You're going to go as fast as you can. And therefore, you're going to be making mistakes. And therefore, you're not going to bother with anything to do with sophistication of a stitch. Or, look, long. These are not just things that would make our clothes more valuable. It would make their lives more valuable. Imagine you could be a garment worker all your life in Bangladesh. You could have been taught assembly, disassembly, taking things apart and putting things back together. You could be paid by the hour and a living wage. Imagine what kind of clothes we'd be talking about. Imagine what kind of an economy we'd be talking about. Because if that's been your life, like it was in Italy, when we had the Made in Italy, when the business moved to Italy, they moved to Italy not because we were pretty. They moved to Italy because we were cheap. And we made an entire culture out of it. So imagine the life of this garment worker in Bangladesh who's been taught something, who's been paid for a job well done and not for a job quickly done, and who would leave a 20-year career in a factory with a really decent skill. She could start her own business, mending clothes for her community, making, occasion where we would have enriched her life. Right now, we stump them.
So we often read in the press that, you know, it's a challenge for some of these businesses to be transparent. You know, we learn about the complexities of a supply chain, and actually, you know, often businesses only knowing who their first tier workers are or first tier factories are or stakeholders, but then not knowing anything about their second or third tier.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we also read about blockchain. So how effective is blockchain in actually, sort of improving the transparency of the industry, in your view?
I'm sure that it is technologically extremely effective, but nevertheless, it's self-declared. And, you know, self-declared, you cannot validate, you cannot compare. So it's a really interesting technology. I'm super interested in it myself, but not on its own. It needs to be attached with a form of, we know that the majority of audits are organized by the brand. But, you know, again, we're talking business here. Yeah, we're talking business of the future. What's the problem? The problem is that the people at the top don't give a shit to be encountering the people at the bottom, you know, because transparency is expensive. Yes, transparency is expensive. It means you need to put in place a system that wasn't there before. You wanted the gigantic industry. You wanted to be able to exploit people and nature. Okay, give back time. You know, I talk about the modern give back scheme as it being the mending in store that, H&M, Zara, you know, bring me something back and I'll give you a voucher to buy something new. I was talking that fashion is unfashionable. That's just you. That's not a give back scheme. Ignore that give back scheme. Anybody offers you that give back scheme, you have my permission to vomit in their face. But, you know, apologies, but it makes me quite angry. The give back scheme is I give you something that you didn't make well enough. You repair it for a very decent amount of money and I take it back. That's a give back scheme as far as I'm concerned. But the reality is that, you know, brands are not investing sufficiently. Even though they're investing a lot, the bigger a brand is, the harder is going to be for them to engage. And unfortunately, until the business regulation change, until we understand that there needs to be a more equal redistribution of profits in those supply chain lines, because we know that luxury doesn't necessarily pay its worker any more than the high street, then, you know, we can predict with ease what brands will and what brands won't do. So it is about returning a system to a new state to a certain extent with a very different morals. I've written a piece for CNN which went a little viral, this phrase, but I did write that there is one innovation that doesn't require technology that we've not ever used, which is treating each other as equal. And, you know, I mean that in the workspace, we are equal. How different am I to the woman who made my clothes? Why should it be that by birth or luck, my life is so different? And why should it not be, as a businesswoman that I've been, my utter commitment to ensure that the people that work with me are as happy as possible as I am. And I don't understand that we can have an industry that doesn't profoundly measure the well-being of workers and nature. And I think that more and more people are also not understanding. Why? Because they are realizing that it is this lack of understanding that has got us where we are now. And right now we are at danger point, and we need to think really outside the box, because it's not going to be a rehash of what we've done. Yeah. It's going to be a real change at the core.
So are there any businesses or brands that perhaps our students, attendees could perhaps look at that, in your view, are potentially, you know, making headway and making a change?
Absolutely. So first of all, I would suggest that you look at fashion. One second, let me do it like I normally do it. Not a great multitasker, but anyway. Okay. Okay, this is really right out there, but it's our Fashion
An open studio.
initiative. Yes. So this is one of Fashion Revolution's initiatives. We've been working with a cohort of designers for the last 4 years. They've changed. This year we're going to have, I think, designers from 21 countries globally. And these are unheard voices, unseen practitioners, some with the most insane talent, others who are just, you know, you can smell the talent, you can't quite see it yet because they're just starting out. Yeah. And every single one of them deserves our attention. Every single one of them has got something new to say, and every single one of them is somehow crushed by this mainstream, like, you cannot scale, you're not scalable, you're not this, you're not that. And yet these guys are just carrying on, making their own parameters. And some of them are really extremely moving. I'm thinking of, you know, Oshadi, who inherited a South India factory and is working the land behind it to make it regenerative. So you get 2 generations of factory owners, real different attitudes between the father and the son. We have some of the UK guys that you know and love so well, from Christopher Rayburn to Bethany Williams, but we have, you know, designers upcycling proper factory waste in India, which, you know, imagine there's a whole bunch of brilliant upcyclists in India. I mean, that will change the panorama there, because it's super hot. You know, we were in Grazia, India last week, in, you know, talking about upcycling in India, and so yeah, have a look at them. But I don't have such a huge thing for the big brands, but I do work so much with the emerging that I want you to put all your focus and all your attention on them. And actually, it's great homework, because easy to analyze a business that to a certain extent is emulating the type of business story that we've seen so far. Some of these guys actually seem impossible to businessify. And yet, I was one of them 25 years ago. I was a brand that would never have been taken seriously. And I now have, you know, it did work as a business. And now I have, you know, hundreds, if not more, that are doing something similar, and it is also working. So if you look at some of these guys that are talking about regenerating snails, or, you know, leather from, you know, earlobes, or the weirdest thing that you could possibly imagine, have a look at them and think, could that be the business of my future?
So it's about being respectful of each other, and it's about having an open mind, because some of these business ideas may sound a little bit like in, I mean, 1997, when you were upcycling, I mean, you were a pioneer. I mean, many people are upcycling nowadays, but back in 1997, you know, I'm sure you were probably unique in what you were doing. So
in the way that we did it, for sure. But I tell you what was unique is that no one noticed. So if I didn't say, nobody would bother asking. So in a way, it's like, oh, okay, fine. I was doing it for completely different reasons. I did it because I couldn't afford the kind of beautiful materials I wanted and the beautiful quality of seamstresses I wanted. Had to make a cut somewhere. So I thought, wait, okay, rubbish fabrics, but beautiful rubbish. But yeah. I'm saying that something else, you know, sometimes what is successful today, and we deem it successful today, was only successful because somebody else failed before it. And one mistake that we do, especially at these, you know, events such as like Copenhagen Fashion Summit and blah, 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 is that we only really venerate what went right, but we don't look at what went wrong. But what went wrong didn't necessarily go wrong because it wasn't right. Sometimes things go wrong because they haven't got the right money, because they haven't got the right people. There's never, you know, the car crash failure. Well, of course there is, But in my experience, I've seen brilliant people that never made a penny, but who deserved accolades and glory. They didn't want to. It didn't work. Or brilliant systems and brilliant ideas that could have worked, but either weren't believed or, didn't function. So that's what I see about my guys. I'm almost interested in the ones that are going to do wrong, because I don't see success unless it's preceded by failure.
Yeah, I mean, we learn by mistakes, don't we? And we need to take risks in order to realize, when to learn. Okay, so we have quite a few questions that have come in, Orsola. So I'm going to open up the floor to questions. So the first question that I've got for you is that comes from someone who has a sustainable business. And the question is, as a brand, how do we market our designs so that our customer knows we are sustainable yet fashionable?
By never using the word sustainable unless you need to, or by using it, what do you mean by sustainable? I mean, I'm assuming that you will have that you're not going to be just sustainable, that there will be a choice in what you do. It's either your materials or your social. That's not sustainable. There are practices that you are using in order to make your business sustainable. That's what you need to describe, the practice before the end goal. Sustainable, as there's a really interesting definition of sustainability in the dictionary. I suggest to everybody that you look at it. You probably are anywhere near there. So you don't need to use that word. You need to describe the processes, the people, and what makes your brand unique.
The word sustainability we use too frequently for too many different aspects. You're right. Sustainability actually means longevity. So something that's got a long-term vision. There's another question here about greenwashing, and Valentina's asking is, how can you know a brand is not greenwashing? Sometimes it's hard to tell what a company's real values are.
It's not. No, it's absolutely not. I'm rephrasing the question. How much time have you given yourself to tell if that's a greenwash? So I am asked this question several times a day.
Yeah.
Sometimes hundreds of times a day. And so please forgive me for being a little bit formulaic in my reply. So what I am saying is, thank you for asking me my opinion. But in this case, my opinion doesn't matter anywhere near as much as you developing yours. So I'm giving you some homework to do so that you can answer your own questions. So the first one is, when you buy yourself a skirt, a dress, or a piece of something online or browsing in a store, how long, how much time do you give yourself to find the perfect shade with the perfect zip, right color, fits around the bum, doesn't make you look fat, is cheap enough as you want it, and it comes in a delivery that suits you? Calculate all of that time. You'll see that it adds up, and start searching with a completely different criteria. Start searching what's contained in that perfect blue that I am looking after. Start thinking not at the size of your waist or the size of your bum, but the size of the pay package that the people who have made those clothes are being paid. Then you go on to the brand in question and you look at their website, and you will see that there is something called a code of conduct. So you go there and you read that code of conduct. Does it satisfy you? Then whatever it is that that brand was claiming, if it is of interest to you, you look at what they claim and you compare with other brands. What are they doing? Or with themselves. Okay, it'll take time because it's a different type of shopping to the one that you now have become so used to doing. But just as you learn to shop effectively for a pair of shoes or a pair of jeans, you're going to be able to shop effectively to dismantle or to accept a greenwash. Everybody greenwashes right now, because when it comes to putting right 200 to 300 years of social and environmental exploitation, nobody is doing it right. But with the right time and the right search and the conviction that your interest is your entry point towards a journey of continuous change, because it's not like if you dismantle the H&M greenwash, then you're going to be happy forever. Then you're going to tackle the other one. And that's all that I can say. It is entirely up to you guys to understand, first of all, your instinct. You know, what I consider a greenwash is probably very different to you. You know, my point of entry is definitely very different to you. So it's in your hands to do so. Then you come to someone like me, and then we can have a conversation about it. But you've already got an opinion, and then we might agree or differ.
So just a question here on the Modern Slavery Act. So we have the Modern Slavery Act, but there's been a lot of debate and deliberation on whether actually it does much. In your view, is the Modern Slavery Act enough? And if not, what should be done to try and prevent some of these unethical behaviours?
Well, I mean, obviously it isn't enough, although I'm a massive fan of the people who started it, and I believe that it was absolutely revolutionary starting point. But again, we go back to this thing that it is self-declared. You know, you need to say whether you have, but at least in this case, you have to do the due diligence as a company to actually check whether there may or may be modern day slavery in your supply chain. It's just this thing, you know, it's deregulated. This ought to be all mandatory. You know, in the EU, and unfortunately we're no longer there, but, you know, they are looking at more due diligence. They are looking at this law, which is the right to repair. In France, they started la loi de diligence, which again puts the emphasis on brands to actually, scrutinize their own supply chain. But the reality is, again, it's still self-regulated. So we really need companies to become so engaged with these processes that they will be just the done thing. Then I'm pretty sure that governments will legislate to make it mandatory, but under no illusions. The fashion industry absolutely 100% needs to be regulated now.
Yeah, and it almost sounds as though we need to have a regulation that spans the globe, rather than sort of all these many different regulations that we find exist across the industry.
Well, I'm sorry, I have to remind you who I am. I'm the creative director of Fashion Revolution, and we have a pretty brilliant policy team, and I am not in it for very specific reasons. So I don't want to take question time on questions where I'm not as accurate as I could possibly be. But please do check the Fashion Transparency Index, do check our website, because for all of your policy questions, they are answered. I'm just not the best at answering them.
Okay, perfect, thank you. So there's a question here about global sustainability and how that incorporates corporate strategy, economics, profit maximization across large-scale companies. The question is, do you feel we need to go back to more the sort of atelier and couture concept as an industry?
No, it's just that we need to have an industry that accepts differences, and right now this is precisely what we haven't got. Think of the word couture. I mean, couture is the same in every house that does couture. They'll do couture the same, and yet there's so much that you don't know. Trust me, couture embroidery, no, it's not done in-house. It's done in India, even couture. So even couture lies. So absolutely not. Nope. I don't want a system that is that elitist. We need to celebrate the differences. The differences is going to be that, imagine if you're sitting in front of 10 apples. Nowadays you go to the supermarket, all the 10 apples are chosen to be the same, and then all of the bad apples are chucked away. I want the bad apples. So imagine you're a designer and you're designing a shape. The closer we get to skeleton, the more we are exactly one like the other, which is why all of these brands design size 6s and size 8s, because it's so easy. The difference in us is in our substance, in our curves. That's what makes us different, one from the other. So even when it comes to businesses, we need to understand that it will never be one model fits all. If we really do want to implement some kind of biomimicry into our lives, and that is, emulating nature, we need to see what nature does. And nature is the, a mother inventor of all diversity. And fashion is the mother inventor of all the sameness. So we need to antagonize these systems, but bring in so many different ones. Interestingly, though, in reply to your question, I teach at Central St. Martin's MA. I lecture. I always do the first talk. And last year, out of 54 students that I spoke to, only probably 51 or 40 they didn't identify with the fashion industry, that they identified much more with the concept of being precisely what you described. So a small couture business on the high street. But again, fashion is about everybody being different. And therefore we need to imagine an industry that accepts those differences. Pretty much the opposite of what we got now.
And then just one further question. From a consumer's point of view, how do you convince people to pay more for a sustainable product, a product that's ethical, I suppose?
You don't. It shouldn't be that way. So the truth is that right now, you should be convincing people that they are paying more to buy something that is unsustainable, and that they're paying the kind of, scented, luxuries of the guy at the very, very top, the guys at the very, very top. The truth is that there is, again, go on Fashion Revolution, plenty of information that if you wanted to pay a garment worker a living wage, the actual price of a t-shirt would rise by maybe 30 cents. So what we need to convince people is that when we are buying something that it's too cheap, nevertheless, that too cheap amounts to being incredibly expensive, a ton load of money going at the top and not at the bottom. So we first of all need to stop thinking of sustainability as being achievable via the act of buying. It isn't. The act of buying is the act of buying. Sustainability is what you do with what you've bought, and all the choices that have gotten you to choosing to buy one thing rather than another. So I often say, when people say to me, what's the best shop where to buy sustainable brands? I say, get out the house, start walking, go to the park, and then maybe something else will happen. So right now, it's either too cheap or too expensive. What we need to do is convince society that its citizens have the right to live a sustainable life as much as their next door neighbor with a ton load of money. That's what we need to convince. And brands have an obligation to be included in that conversation. And as I said, after making 30, 40 years of grossly inadequate profits on the shoulders of people who have struggled to live and struggled to love, give back. So in my ideal future, when you guys are out of school and you start the businesses, this is what will happen. What will happen is that you will say, yep, this is a solid business. This is a business that will make money. This is a business that will support huge amounts of people and their family. Then you will look at the distribution of those profits and you will make them more equal. It's not that complicated at the end of the day if one enters it and removes one word: greed.
Yeah. So Ursula, very nice sort of concluding statements. Just before I say farewell, a couple of questions about your recently published book, Loved Clothes Last. Could you just share a little bit of information about that? And
so it's, as I said, it's a book on why to mend, but it's got a lot of how to mend. It's a book that responds to the creative me. So again, it's not a scholarly book, but it is a book that really tells you the story of why it's so important that we think about longevity. I totally agree with you, Hannah. For me, the closest way to describe sustainability is longevity. And longevity, we're obsessed with longevity as people, so I don't understand how we can't transfer quite so easily the objects that surround us. But it's a really, really cheap book. So I know that you guys are students, but maybe you could buy one copy and share it between 10 of you. It's like £8 or something. I do think you should read it, not because I wrote it, but because I'm being told by so many people that everybody should read it. So now I believe them. Published by Penguin Life. And it's, as I said, I can read you the chapters so you would understand what I am talking about. So the first chapter is called Mending is a State of Mind. The second chapter is called Rewind, Relearn and Resist. The third chapter is called Look Back to Move Forward. The chapter 4 is called Why Care. Then the next chapter, which is chapter 5, is Fabrics of Our Lives. Then there's a chapter on denim and how ridiculous distressed denim is. Then there's a chapter of My Trash. Anyone interested in upcycling and in the best upcycling, that's it. Tech before you buy. Transparency is trending, and All Together Now. So it covers those areas. And if you do read it, if you do buy one copy and share it amongst yourself, do let me know what you thought of it.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Ursula. I really appreciate you giving up your time today. And I know the students do as well. Few really positive comments in the chat and thanking you for your time today. So thank you so much.
A pleasure being here.
Really appreciate it.
Go forth and change the world.
Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.